Meanwhile, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels was openly thanking the British and Americans for their propaganda model and put it to good use for rallying the German people to war.
역사적 자료들을 보면 괴배.
In 1940, Hitler had conquered France.
3,500만 명이란 목숨.
35 million lives were given up in World War II in patriotic fervor, created by propaganda campaigns.
희생되었다.
Australia marches with Britain, land of plenty, land of untold resources, all placed gladly, willingly at the feet of Mother England.
Look carefully at this man. He's the Emperor of Japan, whose forces have committed the appalling atrocities against British Empire and Chinese troops and civilians, men and women in Hong Kong. These are the swine who bound and bayoneted our helpless soldiers in their hands. If these pictures serve to kindle a flame of vengeance throughout the civilized world, they will have served their purpose. Let the cry be vengeance, bloody vengeance.
For the second time, the American public and Congress were overwhelmingly against entering the war in Europe.
Another war, not for me. This time America should keep out, and I know I will. If war breaks out in Europe, I think that this country should heed the advice of its first president and avoid all foreign entanglements. In the event of war in Europe, I think we should stay out of it entirely.
프랭클린 루즈벨트 대통령은
So, President Franklin Roosevelt needed something that could provoke Hitler into declaring war on the US and frighten the public into action. He did this by deliberately failing to warn his fleet commanders that a surprise Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was imminent. The warnings came to him from the governments of Britain, Australia, and the Soviet Union, and are now a matter of public record. We in Korea were among the first to alert the Americans because we know better than anyone what the vicious Japanese are capable of.
To be slaughtered by Japanese troops.
More power to you, President Roosevelt. The entire country's behind you, thrilled with hope and patriotism.
As if using propaganda to send their pacifist population to war wasn't bad enough, consider how America repaid its people for defeating the Nazis. Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip.
Hello everyone, welcome to GGN. Today is December 7th, 1941, a day that will, of course, live in infamy, like 9/11, Gulf of Tonkin, the sinking of the Maine, or any other type of attack that played into the bankers and the international globalist plans. Now, this first video isn't going to be all about this. I just thought I'd get it out of the way in the beginning, because I know there's all kinds of propaganda surrounded the propaganda. Which was, it wasn't just the Japan hated us. There was a lot going on. The biggest one, of course, is the American embargo and sanctions on Japan that were leading up to their attack. And, of course, that Hawaii wasn't even really part of the United States. It was a territory, it was not a state. Most people never even heard of Hawaii at the time. And as you saw in that video, most Americans did not want to go to war, just like World War I. But see, in World War I, the whole point of bringing the United States in was, well, that was actually a Rothschild deal with American Zionists and European Zionists to set up, carve up Palestine and create a place for the Khazarians, or what they call European Jews. So, and that's what a lot of the part of what happened in Germany and stuff like that. So there's a plan for everything. The U.S. ambassador to Japan communicated to Washington on January 27, 1941, that the Japanese were planning to attack Pearl Harbor, but no one believed the ambassador. Again, on November 27, 1941, Admiral Kimmel and General Short received a warning A war warning from Washington that described an imminent attack by the Japanese on the United States in the Pacific. Of course, the irony is that I'm not, propping up the National Socialists in Germany, but they were one of the few countries that were actually fighting against Bolshevism. And instead of fighting against Bolshevism and saying that they were fighting against communism the whole time, they were actually aiding and abetting the Bolsheviks, the United States, that is. So what did they get rewarded with? They got a little perks after, in 1950s, of course. After that, everything basically declined. It's in that one video that you just saw. They basically said that Americans went from a needs society to a wants society, and they just turned them into passive consumers, debt slaves. Bill Murray's Soars is FDR. Says the movie itself isn't so hot. It's good timing, though. So kind of some irony here. Of course, you guys know about the 280 people that were killed from the what was it, typhoon in South Asia. Yeah, the 7.3 quake that hit Japan. Tsunami warning has been lifted. So pretty good sized quake on December 7th, the anniversary. Also in Iran, they got hit by a quake. There was 2 people that were killed. Another part of World War II, besides all of the money that was made by the bankers and all of the treaties that were made after, and the State of Israel was etched in, and nobody could ever talk about the Khazarian Jews ever again, because you could be considered anti-Semitic or a Holocaust denier if you question it, was what? They got to experiment with nuclear weapons and that. U.S. conducts atomic tests amid global urge for nuclear disarmament. The U.S. conducted a nuclear test in Nevada to examine the effectiveness of its atomic weapons stockpile amid the growing global urge for nuclear disarmament. Israel rejects UN call for nuclear transparency. They rebuffed a UN call to adhere to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty like they always have, and open itself to international inspectors, calling the suggestion a meaningless mechanical vote of a body that lost all credibility regarding Israel. But in my own opinion, I think they lost all credibility when they first started, because again, that was another reason for World War II. They got the United Nations because the people said, hell no, we don't want your League of Nations, your global government. So they just created another war and said, all right, we'll kill a bunch of millions of people and we'll shove it down your throat. Foes may arm Syria militants with chemical weapons, as Analyst says. Damascus-based political commentator believes that a possible possession and use of chemical weapons by the foreign-backed militants or terrorists against pro-Assad population would be very and really alarming and dangerous. He said Syria has been the source of many disturbing videos this year and the year before. It said of people getting killed, but this is certainly alarming. So for many reasons, these insurgents spare no effort in their fight against the government forces. And they have shown some sectarian trends in their targeting of certain places where certain minorities are residing in these places. Of course, they're talking about Christians and other types of Muslims. It says here, so it is very alarming that they might possess some kind of weapons that would have such a killing power. NATO counts on Germany for Patriot missile operations, says Analyst. Chemical scare is a cloak for intervention, says Syria. I've covered this before many times, saying that this is going to be the premise, these chemical weapons, and it's really coming out to be that situation as far as a proxy to actually put ground troops in there if they have to. It says Syria stresses again for the 100th time that we have had such weapons, if we had them, that they would not be used against its people, and we would not commit suicide, said the Deputy Foreign Minister of Syria. We fear there is a conspiracy to provide a pretext for any subsequent interventions in Syria by these countries that are increasing pressure on Syria. No evidence Syria is mixing chemical agents, Pentagon official says. So it says a senior defense official. I don't see a name here yet, but it says there's no evidence of the Syrian military having actually begun the process of mixing precursor chemicals to produce the deadly sarin nerve gas. A troubling video appears on YouTube showing rebel fighters testing the chemical weapons in Syria from the 6th. It says while President Obama is busy talking about Syria's chemical weapons, a troubling video appears on YouTube yesterday showing what appears to be a rebel group testing chemical weapons on lab rabbits and threatening to use them against Syrian civilians and on a sectarian basis. So you can go in here and there's a link for the video, and they go in to describe what they're saying that this will be your fate, you infidel Alawites. That's Syria's Ba'ath party and Assad's party that's currently in power. But false alarms and false flags, and so this is how it could go. They basically, the rebels, NATO-backed mercenary terrorists, are going to set off these chemical weapons, kill a bunch of civilians, and blame it on the government. Syria criticizes NATO move on Patriot missiles. They criticized NATO's move to deploy Patriot missiles along its border with Turkey, calling the decision provocative. NATO counts on Germany for Patriot missile operations, as Analyst says NATO is counting on Germany to finance the deployment of Patriot missiles on Turkey's border. Pretty interesting, too, because Germany just, I just saw an article today titled that they're in a recession. So just like World War II, another reason was people always say, oh, yeah, wars boost our economy. Well, it just means that they can take on more debt because they're going to be creating more stuff. In other words, wars don't fix the economy. They actually wreck them. But it is good for the national international military industrial complexes. But yeah, so Germany said they're in a recession, but they're also going to provide troops too. So interesting. Senate orders study on U.S. no-fly zone in Syria. The Senate voted Tuesday to order President Barack Obama to study what options the U.S. will have if it wanted to get more deeply involved in the takeover of a sovereign nation. Adding Islamist group to terror list could hurt Syrian rebels' efforts. So the U.S. State Department, this is kind of surprising, is planning to designate al-Nusra Front, a radical Islamist group in Syria, one of many of them, as a foreign terrorist organization, according to U.S. officials who spoke to CNN. Syrian citizens suffering foreign-backed attacks. So you can go there and check this video out. A mortar shell broke the silence of the civilians who hoped for a peaceful weekend in Damascus. It hit an apartment building, the shell did, in a 10-story building. Experts say foreign-backed militants are attacking civilians as part of a psychological war against them. As always, the foreign-backed militant groups have always been behind several mortar shells that damaged shops and residential buildings. It says, and just one quick side note, for those people who leave comments about, oh, let those sad niggers just kill each other and they're living in the Stone Age and their dogs. Here's a picture of Aleppo. That's just one of the many ancient old cities in Syria, and they're not cavemen. They're just as civilized as any other person. And you just wait until what happens in the United States when the internationalists and globalists and illuminists start to play games with your backyard, right? And invoke a little revolution. Maybe set off an EMP, maybe a nuke or something like that, blame it on North Korea. And all of a sudden China's telling our president to step down as they fund foreign fighters to come in here and just wreak havoc on us. Rebel snipers kill Alawites in northern Lebanon, says 11 killed. Sectarian violence in a northern Lebanese port city of Tripoli, is no closer to ending today despite the military sealing off most of the major roads, setting up checkpoints. With that making fighting on the ground more difficult, Sunni militias linked with Syrian rebels have turned to sniper attacks against the Alawite neighborhoods, killing several people, including a 13-year-old shot inside his own home. Among many of the other targets that the terrorists have their sights set on, rebels warned Damascus airport a legit target. The rebels have issued a warning to civilians and airlines. The airport is now a military zone to be approached at locals' own risk. And this is the same thing that the terrorists did in Libya as well. It says here, Jordanian forces opened fire towards Syria after a soldier injured. Jordans had to tackle these incursions by these foreigners, these terrorists that are spilling into their border. But they are a Zionist-occupied territory as well. And the King Abdullah is right now in Palestine playing as if he's anti-Zionist. It says here, as Jordan's forces opened fire towards Syria after a stray bullet fired from inside the neighboring country wounded a Jordanian soldier. So, and remember, Jordan was one of those countries that had a huge exercise. Thousands of soldiers in Jordan for major military exercise. This was back in May of this year. It was dubbed Eager Lion, and if I believe Assad, his name, whatever, converts over to something lion, so it's probably for that. Thousands of U.S. troops arrived near Syrian shore on USS Eisenhower. This is from RT, so take it for what it's worth. So the stage has been set then, asked Tracy Schumer, then also to Tracy for this, and they're using a watered-down version of the excuse for Iraq war. Assad is allegedly going to use chemical weapons on his own people. It goes on here and says, does it matter that they are foreign jihadist mercenaries? Does anyone care that the U.S. use them on the Branch Davidians and more? And of course, like all weapons in the government hands, chemical shells and bombs are evil. But given the threats from the U.S., Israel, etc., I do not believe that they will be used if they do exist. Finishing with an update from Daniel McAdams, the ones we see using chemical weapons are the rebels themselves, so we know whence comes the pretext. So we'll leave off here and we'll continue And we'll finish up. I have a lot of news to get to. I'll probably do 4 or 5 videos today. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.